Oftentimes I go back over the videos that I create just to make sure that I'm communicating what I want to communicate with you. Keep in mind, this is primarily for my grandkids and my guys in Kenya, for the purpose of leaving a legacy, but also passing on wisdom that has not necessarily been shared. Information is changing to the point where people are telling you to Google your research, not understanding that Google is not the source. I'm reading through the book of Genesis right now, young folks, and I was captured by the relationship of Jacob and his children. Jacob is the son of Isaac, who is the son of Abraham, who is the son of Shem, who is the son of Noah. And looking at the relationship of Jacob with his sons, right around the time that, or right after the time he had wrestled with God and they changed his name, you'll notice in the Bible that sometimes he still references Jacob and also referenced as Israel. Israel when it's about the nation, Jacob when it's about the man. Kind of like Jesus the Christ. Anyway, and looking at the difference between religion, and I'm going to explain that to you a little bit, and the spirit, or what some people would call these days in 2023, spirituality. In other words, not claiming any particular religion, which we call Christianity, the Muslim faith, Catholicism, and any number of organized religious institutions. It's the difference between relationship with the Spirit and relationship with those who represent the Spirit. Now that I said all that, let's not forget that I've always said I am a born-again, Spirit-filled, tongue-talking Christian because that is where I received my education, and Jesus being my greatest mentor, my brother, and the Son of God. We are all sons of God. In your immaturity, you are a child of God. But there comes a time when it is your responsibility to be a son or mature being representing as an ambassador the principles, statutes, and those aren't the only ones, only parts of it, the principles of the words of God. The principles of the words of God, showing your full intent to either be a benefit to the kingdom of God the kingdom of these principles, the God-like principles, or you've made a turn to the wicked side and you're fighting against it. So in other words, you're aware of the power and you use it for selfish reasons, that's wickedness. Because once you come into the full wisdom, well, I won't even take you into the full wisdom. Once you come into the full understanding, because there's a full wisdom to this as well, but once you come into the full understanding, you fast recognize that your actions create actions in other people. And you're responsible for that. Especially when you're looked to as one of the mature members of the body, which is part of the wholeness, the body of God. You're only a member of the body. I'm only a member of the body. But once I come to a certain amount of maturity, I have a certain amount of responsibility, because I know that when the wind blows through me, it affects the weather. Now, you may not be at the place to understand what that means, or you may even think I'm batty. But that's the spirituality part, not the religious part. See, we're all responsible. I'm going to give you an example in a minute. The religious part means you have knowledge of the statutes, the principles, all these things, and you may or may not choose to follow them. But it doesn't mean that you're not in the family. It doesn't mean that you don't have knowledge of. The difference is in the brothers of Joseph, the sons of Jacob, who made up the tribe of Israel. The brothers came from different mothers. And even though Jacob was called along the bloodline, Jacob was an active participant coming from Isaac. Jacob had concubine as well, and he had wives. He had 9 children. I believe it was 9 children through his wife, but strike that. He had 6 children through his wife. I don't remember. Jacob. Yeah. Mother of Leah was the mother of Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, Zebulun, Diana, his daughter, Dinah. But he also had a handmaid who had children, and he had Bilhah, who had children as well. And then Rachel, his other wife, had 2 children, Joseph and Benjamin. So this misnomer of what families look like alone is off the beaten path here in America when we put our religious spin on these things. Even in the Catholic Church, where they've isolated these priests and they're shocked at their sexual deviation, because the priests in the Bible had wives. I forget. I think it's one of Jacob's sons, or that married the daughter of one of the priests. On. So religion can oftentimes have a fleshly bent to it The fleshly bent is called traditions. One person that taught it much better than I could teach it, again, is Dr. Miles Monroe. Brilliant man. And I have to say this, although I credit him on that, when you do your own study, you see it. We get off, and in fact, our religious leaders begin to teach us religion and tradition, and not truths, which are spiritual. You can respect religion, but you have to follow spirit. As you can see, God did not condemn Jacob for having concubine and wives. In fact, Jacob's struggle was similar to his father's struggle. Along with some impatience in how he lived. We're all so broken as humans. But the story I really want to share with you in this next few minutes is really the story of Joseph and his brothers. And you've heard the story before. A lot of you have heard the story before. But getting it out the pit and all this other thing, and where he had interpreted the dreams of the baker, interpreted the dreams of the butler, and the baker dying off, and the butler letting Pharaoh know that there was this young man that he met when Pharaoh was a little bit over the butler. He says, "Listen, go sit down somewhere," and where he met Jacob but Joseph in prison. And he told him about the dream, and he told him about how Egypt would enjoy a certain amount of prosperity, but also would have to prepare for famine. And it talks about how Joseph had followed his spirit. So a lot of people, I've heard it on stage a lot of times, where the pastors say, don't tell everybody your dream, this, that, and the other, because Joseph told his brothers the dream, he told his father, that's it. Getting past all that, and I thank God for the transparency of Joseph. That in following his spirit, even though he had to go through some transformational times in his life, lived by his spirit, and in every circumstance was given favor because he never failed to give. When you're filled with the Spirit, you never fail to give. When you're filled with the Spirit, you strike that. You don't allow walls to be built up into your life to where you stop giving because people do harm to you. He depended upon his ability to sow into the lives of the people in front of him to bring him out of his circumstances. He would have never came out of his circumstances if he wasn't helpful to the people who were around him. It was his reputation of being helpful that brought him not only into Potiphar's house, who ended up disappointing Joseph. I'm sure it would have been a disappointment to me. But what was Potiphar going to do? He had to believe his wife. And then going into jail, and then going into ultimately, because Potiphar was just a guard. He was a wealthy guard, but he was a guard to the king himself. Can you imagine how Potiphar felt when he saw Joseph at the king's house after throwing him away? But it wasn't even about all that. It was about just doing the best you could at whatever position you were at. And trusting that following your spirit would put you where you wanted to be, which was that overall vision that God had given him when he was a child, of his brothers bowing to him in obsessance. And I'm not sure. I think that's worship. I forgot. I looked the word up one time and I forgot what it is now. But and it wasn't an arrogant thing. It was a vision that God gave him. He wasn't trying to be. I've heard it preached that he wasn't being. He was just saying, God gave me this vision, Dad. What do I do with this? And it came to pass because he kept his heart right. That's following your spirit. Religion would have you organizing yourself based upon tradition, and not opening yourself up to having an open heart to hear God. And let me give you a hint. You hear God through the needs of his people. And you offer yourself up as a sacrifice to take care of the needs of his people. His brothers were not like that. When they were at Shechem and he was trying to follow them because his father had sent them out there, and then they ended up leaving Shechem, and he caught up with them. The first thing they saw when they saw him afar off is they had negative things to say about him, and he had done nothing to them. And they conspired against him to kill him. And thank God for the older brother who decided, he said, hey, listen, why would we want to shed our brother's blood, Reuben? Let's not do that. Let's just throw him in this pit. Keep in mind, these were brothers from different mothers and different traditions who made up the family of Israel. It's funny. We all think we corner the market on how things should go instead of cornering the market on collaboration and working with other people and deciding how things would go based upon our spirit, common spirit. These guys all coming from different mothers, but never adopted the heart of their father. And when we get to the place when we're willing to adopt the heart of our Father, then we can understand truly what it means to operate according to the Spirit.